Okay, it's Tuesday. I'd like to call the meeting to order for Tuesday, 19 January 2021 at 7 p.m. First, I'm going to confirm member access. As a preliminary matter, this is Robert Holland. This is Shrewsbury Electric and Cable Operations SELCO Commission Chairperson. Please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Tony Trippi.
Yes.
Kelly Marshall. Nothing heard. Maria Lemieux.
Yes.
And Mike Rapolo.
Yes.
Okay, staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Christopher Roy.
Here.
Kathy Reba.
Here.
Joelle Malabar.
Here.
Jackie Pratt.
Here.
Jonathan Malabar.
Here.
John Laverty.
Here.
Ralph Iacarino.
Here.
Is there anybody else that may have a participation tonight that I did not call?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Is this Kelly?
Yep.
Oh, okay, Kelly, great. Okay, so we introduction to remote meeting. Good evening. This open meeting of the SELCO Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. For this meeting, the SELCO Commission is convened by video conference via Google Meet as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and that you take care not to screen share your computer unless asked by the chairperson or the staff person. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Meeting business ground rules. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I, the chair, will introduce each board member or staff member who has the lead role for this particular item or guest speaker associated with this item on the agenda. After they conduct their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members first and then to staff members, inviting each by name to provide any comments or questions. I will then call upon the members to offer a motion and then for a second. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute and unmute your phone by pressing *6 or mute your computer when you are not speaking, as to not trigger your camera feed or background noise. Remember that unless a document is being shared, your camera feed is triggered by your speaking or background noise. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in colloquy with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. And one final thing, I'd like to thank Mark Serra and the SMC manager and his team for the support in remote meeting presentations. Tonight's meeting is not going live. It is being recorded and will be played at a later date on the SMC channels. With that said, call the meeting to order at 7:03 and take up our first article, which is warrants and bill schedules. Folks, board members, you've received the copy of the warrants and bill schedules. Do we have any comments or questions? I'll go down our list. Tony Trippi.
No problem.
Okay, Kelly Marshall.
Nope.
Maria Lemieux.
No questions.
Mike Ruffolo.
No questions.
Okay, do I have a motion to, and Bob Holland, myself, I have no questions as well. Do I have a motion to accept the warrant and bill schedules as presented and to have me signed for all of us?
Yeah, so moved. Tony Trippi.
Tony Trippi, okay, do we have a second?
A second.
Okay, Mike Ruffolo has a second. We'll go to a vote. All in favor, Tony Trippi?
Yes.
Kelly Marshall?
Yep.
Maria Lemieux?
Yes.
And Mike Ruffolo?
Yes.
And Bob Holland, yes. Moving on to the next meeting agenda item, which is approval of the minutes of December 21st of 2020. Do we have any comments on those minutes? Tony Trippi,
No, I don't.
Kelly Marshall,
No.
Maria Lemieux,
No.
Mike Ruffolo,
No comments.
and Bob Holland has no comment. Do we have a motion to accept the minutes of December 21st, 2020 as presented?
Yeah, so move as presented.
Okay, Tony, do we have a second?
Second.
Mike Ruffolo, a second. Roll call vote to approve the minutes of December 21st, 2020. Tony Trippi,
Yes.
Kelly Marshall,
Yes.
Maria Lemieux,
Yes.
Mike Ruffolo,
Yes.
and Bob Holland, yes. Okay, we have two other items tonight on the agenda. One is the general manager's highlights, which we'll save the best for last. But the next item that is on the agenda is although it says review and consider approval, we have a presentation by Mr. Roy, I believe, on the SELCO power supply policy, which he's trying to more formalize and put into actual pen to paper so that we have something to go on rather than just kind of working behind the scenes. So with that, Mr. Roy, if you're ready, I will turn the meeting over to you. And if you need to present anything, please do so.
Thank you very much. That's a good point. Perhaps, I don't know if it's helpful, I'll attempt to share my screen here. Let's see here. And we'll share a tab and share this. Here we go. All right, did that come through?
Yes, it did.
Yeah, we see it.
Excellent. Okay, so I guess to kick off, I guess the conversation is just a little bit of background about what I was thinking with this document with respect to historical operations at SELCO. One of the things that I believe is an integral part of the utility modernization effort across the industry is really, adding an increased attention and increased strategic vision for how we procure energy. And so I guess one of the things that the dates I use as a big turning point, and I apologize, I'm not exactly sure when this happened for SELCO, but prior to call it, say, between 2006 and 2009, I would argue, the utility world was a simpler place where, for the most part, you signed an all requirements power supply contract, which is exactly as it sounds. Some probably know this better than I. You sign on the dotted line. It covers all of your energy needs and everything else outlined in this document. And that was it. It was everything, all requirements needed and encompassed in that document. And there really wasn't any active management required. So really from that point on, which I guess I would argue it's somewhat subjective, but from from 2006 to today is relatively recent history. That's not a whole lot of time, especially in the context of the utility sector. So what we're continually morphing into is management of our energy procurements similar to an investment portfolio. There's a number of different elements that have to be factored in, that have staggered terms, that have significant financial impacts. And therefore, it lends itself to really an investment strategy that should be reflective of what the community wants to see out of their utility and their energy. And so, when it was, signing one document that covered everything, that was one thing. But now things are so dynamic, and we're adding layers to that. Not every day, but argument's sake, you could say it almost every year. That it lends itself to a document that reflects, current events and is something we can refer back to and revise as the situation develops. And so, this document is really a representation in large part to what has already been happening. So it's not like it's an introduction of change but it's more of a codification of our activities thus far. And one other point before I forget to mention this too, and in some ways, we've talked strategic plan, in some ways, this is going to feed into that document. And while the strategic planning process does take time, we have some more immediate decisions to make, which is why this is not maybe seemingly cart before the horse, but not quite there, where this is going to help us make those decisions in the short term as we gear up to look at that strategic planning process in the long term. And so if you take my word for it, with the strategic plan, generally what you'll see is different goals, and a big chunk of those goals tie to how we procure energy, which is where this document will come into play, and will already, in theory, be at the ready when that time comes. And the other intent is to, stimulate a conversation. I in my past with documents like this have gone many meetings. Hopefully, that depends on the situation, and here it's a representation of things that we've already done. So I wouldn't necessarily anticipate it taking that long, but as we get to some of the latter sections, it is definitely can spark some passionate discussion, certainly in many communities. So I'll highlight those as we go through. So, and not reinventing the wheel, this is going to look very similar to others that I've been involved with in the past. Again, because it's a lot of what we do is somewhat industry standard. As we know, we engage with MWIC a lot. And so you'll see consistency there. And when we get to that table part, that's where you start to see some of the tailored approach for SELCO and the Shrewsbury community. And then that allows us to put our flavor on things. And so before I go one more step, the other thing was, regarding energy procurement and energy policy, I'm sure, I know I didn't include a legislative summary in today's highlights, but those are, from our standpoint, those are some of the most immediate and impactful bills that we monitor as a utility, at least at the state level, where, what the governor is going to sign in for emissions targets, emissions reduction targets, net zero, 80% reductions, things that don't impact us, but send a statement, offshore wind procurements, hydro support, transmission line build-outs, things like that. So this also dovetails with us, fulfilling our duty as a self-regulator that necessarily the state, in large part, doesn't have as much granular control over. So with that, I figured I'd start at the top, and happy to field questions as we go, and I'll try not to get too verbose, but cover the most salient topics. So I guess one of the highlights I wanted to show in the goals section in part one is highlighting, absent of a localized policy, there are larger, even federal, if you take the Global Warming Solutions Act, governing policies that we have to be mindful of for compliance. And so this helps recognize those that we have to follow. And then maybe, and perhaps this is, you'll see some of my recommendation in there, but these are setting minimum levels. And so, and then there's the state level goals that build on top of federal goals, and then there's our policies and our goals on top of that. So you see in here, this is still set to reduce CO2 emissions by 80% by 2050. Some may or may not know, but there was a bill on Governor Baker's desk to make that net zero by 2050. He pocket vetoed that due to some other provisions in there, but at least the news that I get indicates that at some point in the very near future that will get signed. So that's where it goes from 80% to net zero. This is a living document, hence the paragraph at the very end that says probably once a year we should look at our approach to these things. And then the other comment here with the goal is, and I guess a little bit of a foreshadowing with some of my thoughts on the evolution of Mike Quinadamo's role, which is the concept of integrated resources. And so as we achieve these goals, it's not just an effort of power supply management, but it's also integrating the technologies that we leverage and are being developed outside of our control that largely are incorporated in people's homes. You know, battery storage, electric vehicles, vehicle to grid, thermal storage, heating, heat pumps, all of these things have an impact on our power supply and our power procurement strategies. And so it's really kind of that first step into the evolution of how we incorporate all that as we conduct our day-to-day business. So that's kind of that goals section. So with portfolio supply, this one's probably the most similar to what SELCO has done, as far as I have understood, for quite some time, where it's really setting that target of hedging 80% of our power supply with one single contract, not representing more than 20% of that pie. And so really it's codifying our risk management approach in that we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. That could be a risk of fault or outages or other acts of nature that could disrupt that. So really it's those figures are a representation of our risk management strategies that have been in place for a long time, just not really necessarily written down. And so we can go smaller than that for sure, and that's really the most common thing. We'll find different contracts that could be 1%. It doesn't have to be just big players, but right now, we have one engagement of 20%, but other than that, this fits the mold of what we're looking at. On the other point is, and I'm already missing where it says that, but it's also staggered expirations. So we don't have all of our contracts expire at the same time, thereby opening us up to some risk if we try and go out during one particular market condition. Same thing. So the other piece, which I kind of glanced over, and I apologize for that, but in a portfolio, there are 3 distinct categories. And I apologize, I have to rewind a second here. Energy capacity and renewable energy credits. And so this is part of the evolution of the markets where, energy and capacity weren't necessarily managed as actively. And now we throw in renewable energy credits, or RECs, that also have to be managed. So it's really 3 separate portfolios that have to be managed with strategies and risk management protocols that pertain to the volatilities of those individual markets. And so now going back to the part that I just highlighted, the energy side with that 80% plays to the energy market risk and the energy contracts we can procure. The next paragraph covers capacity markets. Capacity markets, and I apologize if this is covering things you already know, it just helps with my flow. But capacity markets, basically being the representation of the commodity that we have to support should it be needed. And so right now we rely heavily on the forward capacity auction, and that's a much more volatile and uncertain market. Therefore, we wouldn't see the same certainties and same contracts that you would have in the energy market, where you can say, hey, I'm going to buy, I don't know, pick anyone, solar, wind, hydro. We know we have substantial control over the outputs. Do your maintenance, subject to storms and whatnot. There's very robust modeling out there that show the reliability. Therefore, you can engage in these long-term contracts. Capacity requirements are all over the place. ISO rules change, and so really trying to engage in a contract to secure some price certainty commands some very steep price premiums. So we don't necessarily do that regularly, but at least the language is here to say, hey, if we do find an opportunity, we can go up to 50%. So we've hedged, so halfway there if we have something come up. Very infrequent. And instead we rely on the forward capacity auction process to I guess stay in the live markets and prepare for what comes next, because those are bid out in advance. And that same concept there, 25% of SELCO's requirements. That way you have at least 2 contracts, if any, that make up your capacity procurements. And so then the third one, which excuse me, which I'll get into, it's the newest one and perhaps the most controversial one, is the renewable energy credits. And so renewable energy credits, there's any number of different definitions of what consists of renewable energy. And so the way I look at RECs, and I'm totally open that there's alternative opinions out there, but the way I look at a REC is there has to be some consistent benchmark where people can compare an industry to how they're performing in relation to their peers. And so if we're all doing our own thing, it makes it very difficult to in some ways, I guess, make it a competitive type of model where we can measure our progress. And so RECs really are assigning environmental attributes to energy sources like solar and wind and hydro that say, okay, if you build one of these resources, then it's going to generate a credit or certificate, you choose your word, that represents the environmental goodness of this generating resource. And so what they've done now is they've used that certificate to create a market to trade the environmental benefit to society in a really what my editorial comment in there, really what is a fabricated market. It's not an actual commodity. We decided to create a certificate, and now we're going to throw it out to a market and see who assigns a value on it. And so because of that, the pricing has been all over the place, and and it's really heavily subjected to supply and demand model of fundamental economics. And so really the way I leverage this mostly to be able to highlight the success that a utility, especially SELCO in this case, is having with respect to our efforts to further the broader mission, like we saw in the Global Warming Solutions Act. There's going to be, the state level bills that come out, and then whatever targets that the commission would desire to implement, and it really leverages us as a utility and those serving the community to represent what we're doing with respect to our bigger picture goals. And the other, I guess, analogy I've used is I likened it to a credit score. Might not like it, but here's the 3 scores that everyone's subjected to when they want to get a loan. And if I went to a bank and said, no, me and my wife came up with our own metric that says this is what our worthiness for a loan is, they'd say, I don't know what this is. It sounds good, but see you later. And so that's where, I can understand the effort to create a uniform platform across the board where we could make up whatever rules we want. In some ways, that's what I'm sure we've talked about the Muni bill, but there's also an element to be said for understanding the other benchmarks out there. So, it's inevitable we'll be compared to those as well. So with that's where you get this table. I did not modify the table to match where we are today because I was hoping to incorporate any type of feedback or commentary from this meeting as an introductory measure for this type of document. But really what you see here is our leverage as a municipal utility to say, hey, look, we understand the majority market share of the utility sector is private, regulated by the DPU. That's, and state laws to some extent. So that's where you see the 310 CMR 775 in the last column. That's the benchmark that when you go out to the general public that largely are unfamiliar with the public power business model, that's the benchmarks they're using because that's the state imposed levels for investor-owned utilities. And so that's there to say, hey, this is how we compare to the majority of definition out there. And B, at the time of drafting this, it was also unclear whether or not the munis would have their own standard, if you will, to follow, or be bunched in with the bigger utilities as a state regulated metric. And so this really said, okay, if in that scenario we get bunched in, how are we doing? You know, does our definition have any standing in the bigger, you know, the bigger Massachusetts definition, if you will? And so then the second column, percent of total SELCO power supply portfolio, that's really our ability to say, okay, we understand what the minimums are, and it's our option, if you will, to say, okay, we'll either match what's going on, or we'll aspire to be slightly more aggressive based on a number of other factors that we can discuss in a minute. But really, it's a representation and a codification of our statement of how we want to proceed with comparison to the state mandates, if you will. Even the bill that the governor pocket vetoed the other day, that had language that was not quite the same as 310 CMR 775, but it's still there. So again, the underlying point being there's a minimum set of standards imposed by a higher governmental body that we have to be mindful of, or else you know, face penalties and other negative consequences. And so this is allowing us to track that and say, we saw that, we're going to be a little more aggressive to be on the safe side to make sure we're hitting our targets. And so that's column B, and that can be updated at a moment's notice, you know, because again, with the volatility of the markets, especially in this particular case, because we're talking environmental attributes, because it can be so volatile, you know, you might set a target of 50%, you know, by 2021, you know, I'll make something up, but then, you know, the market goes haywire and it would cost, you know, $10 trillion. It's just not possible. And so you can go back to the drawing board, revise it, and then set new targets for the, you know, the remaining years in the table. And so how to do that and how to hit these numbers is really the paragraph that follows this this table, and so that's where you see. And I think these few sentences are probably the ones that have stimulated the most discussion in my past. But it says SELCO will buy and retire all RECs available in power supply contracts. So again, that's a very subjective, localized decision because there are cost considerations when doing so. And then the other one, and this was somewhat of, and I'm dating myself a little bit here with this, with the legislation that's been more current with this month, but to get us there, that's also, you know, you'll get a different answer depending on which community to go to, but how you procure the different classes of RECs. And so that's one thing I didn't cover in the prior paragraph, but you know, to add further complexity to it, the environmental benefits of a resource fall into different categories depending on state definitions of how good they are. And so, for instance, a class 1 REC would represent your most premium, you know, most, if you will, most valuable environmental resources, largely the epitome being solar and wind, largely generate class 1s, but there are others to be added as they vet, you know, they being the state and other stakeholder interest groups, which include municipal utilities, to include other resources that help balance out the portfolio needs. And so then you have class 2 RECs, and you have other places that, you know, other neighboring states have definitions of what class 1 and class 2 are. And so just to add another layer to that, because class 1s are the most premium, they command the highest prices. Therefore, if we're selling them, we would get the most money. but on the same vice versa, if we're buying them, it costs the most. And so we have to look at, that's that localized decision about, do we want to be, it really is an investment. Do we want to be investing in those resources? Or, another one that I've leveraged heavily in the past is Class 2. Class 2 is your hydro resource. So hydro is been classified, newer hydro is classified as Class 2, and Class 2 RECs, as it sounds, are seemingly less desirable than Class 1, but they're more nimble, and their price is exponentially lower than a Class 1 resource. And so they're good to fill out contracts and also make that transition in many cases from an emissions portfolio to a non-emitting portfolio, because it gets your feet wet. It's not a huge financial burden, and really the ultimate goal being transitioning to all Class 1 RECs over time is kind of where those twos have fallen in the mix in my past. And then the last paragraph in there specifies that these RECs would come from New England states, because another layer on that is RECs and are generated by resources all over the country. And so, you have strategies out there, I'll classify them as strategies out there, where you could be, companies are doing this, as I'm sure folks are more familiar with this than I, but you have companies like Microsoft and Amazon. They can say, look, we're 100% carbon free or non-emitting or renewable, whatever word you want to use. But really what they're doing is they're going and buying RECs from Texas, where there's so much wind, it exceeds the actual load. Therefore, they'll pay you to take the RECs. So it's really, in some ways, it hasn't commanded a lot of popularity because it could be construed as a marketing effort where they're paying you to take these RECs because they don't know what to do with them. And then you can go and classify your company as fully renewable. And when it really, they could have been located in Boston and they're buying Texas. And so it's there's some circumvention, I guess, of the intent there because the investment dollars aren't going to the actual grid, because the engineer in me has always said, that's great, we can say whatever we want for all these targets, but there's some poor engineer out there that has to figure out how to get the electrons to someone's house. And so if we're not making the investments in the localized grid, then that's fine. Texas will have a great grid because we're sending all the money there, but we'll all be in the dark up here. And so how we procure RECs does have a direct impact on the investments made in the grid we're tied in, and I think that's an important factor to consider when we're making these procurements. And then just to round that out and stop myself from talking more, but the equivalence of supply side and demand side measures is just to address a common question, which is, if we make these policies and make these decisions, what's the value of energy efficiency? And so this goes back to the strategic plan, where for a long, long time, success was measured as energy reductions. And in reality, that's somewhat of a dated metric because what we're trying to do now is push people towards electrification as the only energy source that can be greened up, whatever pace you so choose. But but that's going to mean more electricity use. And so, putting on a form that's looking for energy reductions is going to look like you're failing, but in reality, we're actually making progress because we're converting people off of other fuel sources onto electricity, which is then subject to this policy, thereby reducing the emissions and hitting our targets as set forth by whether it be the commission, and then further to that being the state and in the federal level. So I guess with that, that's where I'll stop myself and certainly field any questions, comments, or concerns.
Well, thanks, Mr. Roy. Just one question I have, then I'm going to ask each of the members go through and get their inputs, and then I'll have a few questions at the end. But right off the bat, though, with your chart that you've been showing, where we were going to be in certain times, like being in 2021, we're citing that by the state's requirements, whatever, we would be at 22%. We need to be at 22% not emitting this year. do we, and I know you said there's varying definitions, but I was always the impression that we were at 30+% on non-renewable. Am I wrong? Or non-emitting?
Yeah, yes, sir. So I think the best answer to that is by current, because the bill was vetoed, if the bill passed in last week, I believe our target would have been, I'm sorry, our percentage would have been 40%. Because that incorporates some of the language that we, as municipal power in Massachusetts, have tried to go and gain a voice at the table, if we will, to say, here's how we've procured energy, because there's differing opinions on how nuke should be treated. There aren't emissions in that, but there's other environmental considerations that people aren't super thrilled about. And so how do you treat that as emissions resource? There's NIPA, a long-standing hydro project from Canada, where again, there's never been RECs associated with that. When that was built, this is great. There's no emissions and it flows all the time. This is awesome. And instead, now how do you incorporate that? And so there's another factor in here, which I didn't highlight, but it goes into answering that question, which is the notion of a load reducer. And so if there isn't a REC associated with that, our stance has been, that doesn't mean it's emitting. It doesn't mean you could magically go to a nuke plant and find emissions coming from that. It's just, the compromise, if you will, is somewhat saying, look, when we go out to calculate how much of our kilowatt hour sales are corresponding to emissions, we can deduct those that are powered by energy, clean energy sources that don't necessarily have RECs associated with it. So that, I think, bumps us down a little bit. It really, as I'm sure everyone knows, where nuke falls in, that has a major impact. I know our neighbors in Hudson had a lot to say about that, because the vast majority of their portfolio is nuclear power, and if that suddenly was classified as an emitting resource, now they've gone from, I don't know the exact number, but very high percentage of non-emitting resource to dirty, and that's not necessarily an accurate representation of the generating resource. And so I'd say 35 is probably, as far as I know, I apologize, I don't have the specifics, but 35% by the more strict standard, if you will, and 40 if we're incorporating our recent hydro procurements and the muni language in the bill to be passed.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up for the board commissioners to ask questions. I'll start with Mr. Trippi. Mr. Trippi, do you have any questions at all about the policy?
Yes, are we locked into this policy? I mean, are we penalized if we don't meet these numbers because we're a municipal? Or is just a goal for us?
Mr.
Great
Roy?
question. Sure, great question. So as of right now, absent the newer legislation, we're not penalized because we're not incorporated into the CMR 775. However, there is very strong movement to rectify that, if you will, because there are other utilities out there that have leveraged that fact to not necessarily participate as thoroughly as the state would like in these initiatives, and so again, that's a whole nother hot potato of political quagmire. But really, the notion is, because the state is prioritizing these emission standards, they want everyone to participate, and so they're finding mechanisms to say, which is the newest legislation, if you don't meet these targets, there will be a penalty. So we have to submit plans to show how we're doing this, and we're compared to, tossing in demand side, we're compared to the Mass Save program. So it's one of my personal missions to show that our programs are more effective than the Mass Save program. We do a lot more with a lot less. And so those are where, we start to factor that in, even though currently it's not a requirement, as the short answer.
The other question I had in that decarbonization roadmap 2050. Is that what you were referring to here?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. So if I may comment on that.
Yeah, please.
So with the roadmap, because, you know, at the state level, there's these targets, and these targets are being, if you will, imposed on the IOUs because they're reluctant to do this because a lot of these initiatives aren't the most profitable, and they're more expensive in many cases. And so really these are regulations saying, as a state representing our constituency, you know, our residents and businesses, this is what's important to us. And so up until recently, there hasn't really been clear guidance on, well, how are you doing this? You know, you could tell me to be 100% non-emitting tomorrow, but you're not, you could tell me I have to fly to Mars, you know, that's fine, until someone actually puts, the thinking cap on, how are we going to get there? And so, somewhat as a foreshadowing, with some of the, I've been fortunate, I guess, to have work done in the past on generating a localized roadmap to achieve these targets listed in the table. But your reference to the state's 2050 roadmap, that's their effort to say, okay, we recognize that we're not sure how all these sectors come together. How do we lower emissions in energy and transportation and the building sector and all of that? And so they're trying to gather their smartest folks to provide guidance, and really in some ways quality control, because they've solicited bids from these bigger utilities that have really been lackluster, to be nice. And so they're trying to say, look, it's doable, here's how it's going to happen, and here's the costs impact that we have to prepare for.
Yeah, they have things in there. They're talking about converting houses to heat pumps and all kinds of crazy stuff, but it sounds good.
Exactly.
Do it, right.
Sure.
No other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Trippi. Kelly Marshall.
I'm actually fine, thank you. That was an excellent work.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Maria Lemieux.
I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Ruffolo.
The only question I have is, and my knowledge in this area is pretty light, but I've seen that number 80%, but I've also seen 90%, and then I've seen ranges 80 to 90%. And my question is, should we be striving for something better? And if we strove for something better, what would that entail, or what would that be? Would we even do that? That's something we should do, that kind of thing.
Mr. Roy.
Sure. So there are two, if I may elaborate on that as well, there are two other metrics that go into that percent reduction. There's the interest, if you will, to make that more aggressive, to be net zero or 100% by 2080, which is what we saw in the latest legislation for the governor. And the other one is, and this is also subject to local input, which is, what's our benchmark year, where the state is leveraging 1990 emissions to do that calculation, whereas there are other communities that say, pick a different year, pick the highest historical year to enact more emissions, more aggressive, I guess, emissions reductions. And so, but from the state's perspective, right now it's 1990, and I again take it with, it's not the way it is now, but I would be willing to bet it'll be 100% by 2050 before long. And so the way I look at it is, and again, this is purely, I guess just a comment for consideration is, we receive our marching orders to achieve these goals, but adding a cushion, adding an element of leadership, if you will, because that's, I guess, if I could be candid, I mean, a point of pride for work that I've been involved with in the past, which is, here are these aggressive targets. We want to demonstrate how we can create the roadmap for you. We don't have to wait to have someone tell us how to do it. And so if we set those goals to be slightly more aggressive, that forces us to innovate measures on how to achieve those goals in a more expedited manner, rather than waiting for someone to pave the way.
Anything else, Michael?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Bob, can I ask a question? It's
Yes,
Maria.
Maria.
At what point does it become cost prohibitive, however? Like if we get more aggressive than what the minimum requirements are, I mean, if there aren't markets out there for us, like does it be like don't we have to weigh out the option of, how much is this going to cost for us to get there if we get there before before, like if we don't, you know what I mean? Like if we're going way beyond what we have to go to, or everybody else has to go to, what are our prices going to be?
I'll field that one if
Yeah,
I
go
may.
ahead. Go ahead.
That's a great question. So that's also dovetailing with what I would envision the evolution of Mike Hughes' role is really, the bread, the meat and potatoes of these types of meetings I've made to other boards is answering that question, is presenting the balancing act between leadership in this type of space versus fiscal impact to those that have to bear that burden. And so we do it to some extent now. I mean, as everyone knows, we have the rate stabilization fund, but insulating ourselves against the volatility of transmission and capacity markets is somewhat nothing's easy. But I say that to use the term loosely. But it's more straightforward than managing a rec portfolio that can change at a moment's notice. And so that's where we would absolutely, before enacting a policy or target like this, what it would come in concert with, here's our analysis of current rec markets. I've issued memos in the past that have the trading sheets from the stock exchanges about what they cost. And so if we go out and procure these credits, whether here's class 1, here's class 2, here's Connecticut, here's Maine, here's Massachusetts, that's how we get creative with managing our portfolio to achieve the goals based on the market conditions. And that's where this is the evolution of all requirements contracts, a little bit over a decade ago to now, which is an active management of markets in achieving these targets, because there is no one single place to go to just say, hey, we have to do this. Can I just sign and have it all go away? And that doesn't exist anymore. And absolutely, we'd present those numbers. I have analyses that I've done in recent months and recent years that I can share to show you what those would look like. But again, they'd be dated because things are evolving, but they're an integral part of making this type of decision.
Any follow-up, Maria?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Chris, maybe I'm putting words into Maria Lemieux's mouth, but I think what kind of our old standard, and I think the thing that the board has always been long-term is, but providing quality, consistent power, but at the lowest possible cost. And I think concerns that that among us are the fact that, like Maria presented, we don't want to get too far ahead of the wagon train here, because they may shift off in another direction somewhere along the way, and then we're caught holding a big bill for something that maybe we didn't need to do. On the other hand, we don't want to be caught still in the pits when everybody else is racing down the track. So, and I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to stay ahead of that with the like the solar site and everything else that we did here in town. My concern, though, is some of that stuff that with the solar goes to that paragraph that right under your chart that says SELCO will buy and retire all RECs available in its power supply contracts. And that just seems like it'd be a lightning rod, because I think with the solar site that we built, there's RECs involved with that and agreements that we had with NWIC and whatnot, that I'm not necessarily sure that we want to void ourselves of RECs and whatnot, because there's still money to be made on that. That's another hedge on the side. But any feedback on that one?
Absolutely. Okay, I'm not muted. Absolutely. So that's a great comment as well. So if you throw in solar, which I kind of glossed over that a little bit, solar comes in a certain generation of solar. That's what I mean. It's impossible to cover all the details in a limited amount of time, but there's a certain generation of solar that comes with SRECs, solar RECs, which are outrageously priced. And so even it makes it, really difficult to justify doing anything but selling them. And that also goes to Class 1 RECs too. There can be an argument to be made. So there are other intermediate strategies, and that's what I mean. I think these are, almost a foreshadowing, if you deem it appropriate, a foreshadowing of other material that we presented to the commission of suggesting, we could sell SRECs and get that, large amount of revenue, and then you can buy twice as many Class 1 RECs, just as an argument. And so there's that horse trading, if you will, that can be done based on REC value. And so you can, kind of reach that middle ground. And that's where Class 2s come into play, where in comparison to all of those other ones, even, they're dirt cheap. In terms of power supply costs in general, it's noise. I would say, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but for effect, that you can start to dip your toe in the water with Class 2s and then migrate from there. And that's where, again, as we see the gradual pace to increase share of renewable, that's where, well, how fast we want to go. If we know we're migrating out from Class 2s to Class 1s, here's the rate increase that would be needed, and we can forecast that out. And so that's where we start to strategically plan out our rate increases over time. So we know, okay, we have to have X percent of Class 1 RECs by 2022. We're going to need, to space out, 3% rate increases. And I don't mean to throw out numbers, but, Shrewsbury has admirably low rates. And it's a catch-22 there a little bit, because that also means that to achieve some of these goals, whether they're more aggressive than the state mandates or not, that does indicate there's probably a need for a rate increase to incorporate those additional RECs. But hopefully we can, and again, I apologize, this is some of my lack of familiarity with our portfolio at the moment, but we can leverage some of the SRECs to buy Class 1 RECs, which meet some of these requirements. And we start to plan out, okay, if we're really going to achieve these, and when do our nuke contracts expire, because we don't want to be stuck if we're relying on one contract that won't be renewed, and maybe nuke falls out of favor. And so these are the things that I think factor in, and we can present numbers, I think, because that's a major factor in the localized policy making, which is, is a dollar increase in people's bills too much? Is it $10? I'm sure Jackie has information on that from past surveys, but that's where I want to make sure we get it right and balance that sentiment with those of making sure we're meeting at least the minimum, if not a little bit more, to show our leadership. And if you don't mind, I just 10-second comment. I think, again, in the big picture of emissions reductions for the state and the country, and perhaps beyond that, a heavily, commonly growing in, as we alluded to with the roadmap, growing in understanding is the electrification of society. And so one of the things I've done, and they've been very helpful, is engaging with Kevin and Kristen over the new police station, and trying to go through some of the things we just talked about here to say, look, you put in a gas furnace today, I'll still be working in 2050 probably. So I'm going to be the guy that has to somehow make the furnace you put in 2020 more efficient in 2050. It's not going to happen. And so it's these decisions that are made today in concert with our power supply procurements that can have a major impact in goal achievement decades from now. And one of the crowning achievements there is everyone's trying to push to net zero someday. And so one of the arguments I've made, leveraging the public power brand, is that someday someone in public power is going to be the leader that says, we've pushed electrification to all of our homes and businesses, and we've fully decarbonized our portfolio, therefore the whole town is net zero. And whereas everyone else is going to be stuck trying to chip away at new construction one by one. they catch up. So those are things that I'm not suggesting we'd have to do that today, but by any means. But that's the ultimate, just in the interest of portraying the ultimate goal by 2050. That's how this plays in and acts as those stepping stones to get there.
Well, thank you, Mr. Roy, for the I'll call it the introduction of opening, cracking the door open on the overall strategic plan that you're developing, along with trying to recruit somebody to be one, whether it's one person or a couple of people to help in that and all that fiscal responsibilities of procurement and electrification and putting that plan together, and also how we wheel and deal in RECs, because I'm fearful in that I don't know enough about the RECs to just say let's do one thing or the other. And so this was a good introduction on that to the community and to the board members and the like. And so I'd like to say that I appreciate the presentation. I don't think unless there's an objection from any of the board members, I'd like to kind of roll this over for continued discussion, potentially add it on to next month's agenda to just kind of update as to what's going on. Does that meet with your needs there, Mr. Roy?
Yeah, yes, sir. I think certainly with this introduction, it just gives us the ability to refine it a little bit further and start to incorporate some of the financial impacts and really just the more immediate need, and not immediate as in the next, this meeting to next, but we do have the RECs in the holding pattern. And so that's where, what we do with those is really what's just driving the most immediate decision. And so that's what we'll leverage to tie up what to do with our current RECs that we have with respect to a longer term.
Yeah, and I think given the not the uncertainty, but the void that Mr. Quintanamo's departure has left, and also just trying to get it together. That if you can come up, if it's RECs that's your most important thing in the that's got the 100 megawatt light bulb flashing at it, then if you want to come and present that next month, as specific as to where we want to go, then I would be very open to that. With that said, I'd like to poll each of the commissioners to see if everyone's in agreement with the proposal to we won't vote on the approval or of this supply procedure, but we'll roll it over to next month for continued conversation. Tony, do you have any comments on that?
I do not. I agree.
Okay. And Kelly Marshall?
I do not.
Okay. And Marie Lemieux?
I do not.
Okay. And Mike Ruffolo?
I agree. Also, I'm really interested in understanding the value of the efficiency, the cost of the efficiency, are we ahead of the game or behind in this, and is technology going to catch up so that if we move too fast, it costs us more to do this, as technology catches up to this, maybe we get there faster. And then I am very concerned that it is a tradition in this community that we do have very low rates, and it's something we're very proud of. So it's a very, very interesting balance that we have to walk, a tightrope that we have to walk. I'm very intrigued by this, but I think we need to know a lot more.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, I think overall, Mr. Roy, I think our feedback is we really liked what you presented. I mean, it's really an eye-opener to a conversation starter. And so each month, as you can present, like you said, if RECs are the big thing, maybe we can talk specifically about those next month. If the governor pocket veto gets overridden, or maybe it's already been, overridden, or won't be session. Maybe they won't go back in session to override it. But when we finally have some other white, smoke going up the chimney, other than Mr. Trippy's cigar smoke, we'll be able to we'll be able to figure out what. What actual goals we have, at least in the near term. Okay. Well, that I think we'll go to the final item. And again, Mr. Roy, I guess it goes to you with your. You have a presentation today, or just want to review your.
The highlights.
Yeah, your general manager's highlights. The floor is yours, sir.
Absolutely. So, trying to stay in theme, I did want to call attention to some of our distributed generation figures for 2020. You see the 14 new solar applications, but I think the most meaningful figure I just wanted to point out was total online, or even you could go with total systems. They're relatively close, but it shows we have 6.3 megawatts of distributed generation within our territory. That is a substantial amount. I know, we have a large landmass, that consists of the borders of Shrewsbury. And so I would predict that number continues to rise, obviously heavily dependent on people's abilities to adopt these technologies and as solar panels become more efficient. But again, tying in with this theme, 6 megawatts is a fairly substantial figure to incorporate in our resource planning. Our megawatt, not just the financials of sales and losses and things like that, but also our energy. This number impacts our energy procurements and what kilowatt hour figure we use for our RECs, which then again introduces another cost impact. And so I just wanted to point that out, that's an impressive figure, and I think Shrewsbury is positioned to continue that growth, just given the land available, the geography, and the composition of the community. So that's just a further emphasis on the energy side of things evolving over time. And you can see there the estimated kilowatt hours produced is 3.5%. I mean, that's not inconsequential by any stretch. And then added to that, the proposed commercial systems. I apologize, I stopped sharing my screen. I didn't even think it might be helpful to do this one, but
no, that's all right. I think if you can probably just list those locations and the kilowatt, that works.
Sure. So in the commercial systems, there's working from bottom up on the table, but Bowditch, Centec Boulevard, the future Edgemere Lake Street Plaza, and Route 9. So there's 4 there, and of the 4, if you look, you have one that's a megawatt, another at 3.5 megawatts. So you add in the other ones for a little bit of added emphasis, and you've added a whole nother 50% to our behind the meter portfolio there. And so, not for argument's sake, call it easy math. We're at 5-6% of our portfolio coming from generating resources that we don't own or necessarily contract with, depending on how we engage with these commercial units. And an added factor of that, which I think is going to, perhaps another element of foreshadowing, is in concert with our power supply policy, is what other private generating resources do we encourage? We have we've been approached for a combined heat and power plant. I'm sure it's come up and perhaps will come up, but fuel cell units. And so, as a community, I've had other things come up. I mean, throw in biomass, anaerobic digesters. These things are beyond just the energy side, but it's also character of the community. Do we want to support something that might be less desirable to the neighborhood that it's in? So I feel like in some ways, not for this particular policy itself, but I just wanted to highlight, that's our indirect influence over shaping the character of development in Shrewsbury, where, if it's a substantial generating facility that would tie to the grid, we do have say over whether or not we want to even allow it. And so that these are solar, so that's not the same. But, as we get further down the road, perhaps with combined heat and power or fuel cells or whatever else could be proposed, that's I think worthy of consideration. So just so Joelle doesn't get upset, we have to go out of the energy side, and we throw in some of his substantial cable and fiber achievements. Well, with Jackie too, starting with retransmission consent. I do believe as of Monday, Jackie sealed the deal with our last contract, so we are fully up to speed with retransmission agreements, and therefore the rate increases we talked about are sufficient, and we won't be seeing any blackouts and all that unpopular stuff. So So as you can see here, there's some of the details behind that, but the big, overarching theme is, that's closed out, and that's, every 3 years, that's quite an undertaking. And so kudos to Jackie for navigating that, I think, in a very smooth fashion this year. Again, other noteworthy points, the new residential fiber speeds. We had a brief meeting about that to make sure we stay competitive with not only pricing, but the speeds associated with that pricing. And so that's what you see here in this table, where, again, in this remote new normal, the increased speeds can go a long way. And we want to make sure, again, I think it's important to be mindful of the light that we're painted in with respect to our peers and our competitors. And so making sure we, stay a leader in that space. This is an effort to continue to do that. Share the Warmth is very successful, and as everyone knows, in these unprecedented times, that's a great success to be able to help out people with their bills, and folks that are having to defer payments for whatever hardships they might be facing. And so having substantial funds there with what I thought was an admirable contribution from SELCO. Just continues to highlight the benefits that we provide to the community. And then to throw in some of the fiber efforts, we've upgraded the links. And so right now we have there was redundancy, but now we're talking full 100% bandwidth capacity for both our links to Boston and Worcester, which we've seen oddly enough, a decades-long stint of not having any issues, and all of a sudden a tree melts one fiber, and I think it was a backhoe on another. This just continues to reinforce the fact that we need to have that redundancy in here. This shows that we can have a failover scheme that's fully redundant. Node splits, despite our best efforts to move as fast as we can with the fiber project, we still have to be mindful of keeping current with people's needs, bandwidth needs on the cable system. So Joel and his team have been doing a good job with monitoring that and making sure we stay ahead of the game with the capacity needs in the various areas of town. So this was if you could call it that, a third round of node splits to make sure people get the service levels that they deserve. And the fiber project is proceeding. Not to glance over one of our biggest efforts, but the head end folks have put in the equipment needed to light 3,000 customers as part of phase 1. So we're making that steady progress to get folks onto that system, and start to and related to that, this didn't make the briefing, but we launched a SELCOupgrade.com website on Friday to start build a resource for people to go to see where we're at with the project. Can they sign up, as well as other information that's frequently asked. So we're making progress there, and I not in here, but it's I think absolutely worthy of mentioning is the 1.42% interest rate on the bond for the project. And so I think that's excellent, I guess is the word that comes to mind. And so with that, our project strategy is to leverage those funds for all of our expenditures starting immediately. And that way we can get those under our belt, we can make the procurements we need, and we're better positioned at the close of the project to leverage that from cash. So, we're either not stuck with excess bond funds, or we have additional funding that we needed to secure based on everyone demanding fiber to support remote work. So I think it's just an added layer of security at a very attractive rate that I think it's going to work out well. Just a quick touch on the modern Wi-Fi. Again, same theme as the electric side, but making sure we're staying current with society's expectations of the people that, the entities that provide them service. Everyone does everything, not everyone, I'm exaggerating, but, a growing number of people, do everything on their phone. How many people, when's the last time a lot of folks have been to a bank, or, pay everything with credit card or online? This is the same thing. Everyone wants an app. So this is great, where it starts to empower people to take more control over their Wi-Fi with an app on their phone. As we all know, again, the importance of range extenders and high quality Wi-Fi in people's homes, especially giving folks that aren't necessarily IT experts the ability to help them, maintain that solid connection. To throw in some IT, we have a number of computers and a backlog that need additional support. So just a, I think, noteworthy point that we're bringing in a temporary resource who I think it's not inappropriate to mention, but he's a former IT employee of good standing. So we're lucky that he can come right up to speed and make an immediate impact on day one, like it was yesterday. And we'll use that to test the waters too, to see. I know IT staffing levels have been talked about for some time, so we can use that to as somewhat of a test bed to see what we would need to sustain increased service levels on the IT front. And then the last thing that didn't make the list, I apologize, is the also evolving topic of vaccines. Across my inbox over the last week or came two letters, one from both at the federal level, one from the Department of Energy, that is reaching out and encouraging the CDC to classify energy and utility sector workers as akin to first responders for grid resilience measures. And also FERC sent the same letter to the CDC. Those decisions are largely governed by state and local public health officials. And so those letters made it to the governor's desk in each state. And so they came across my desk as well. And we have both our public power lobbying arms trying to encourage these public health officials, whether it be Mass Public Health or more locally. I sent it to Kevin and Kristen to say, hey, if you have any forum to advocate on our behalf, that'd be great. So we can encourage, Worcester Public Health or others to start looking at, where we fall in line with vaccinating our workforce to make sure, we're not quarantined or anything else, when the blizzards hit and whatever else could come down the pipe. So that's an ever-evolving topic. We're not in line yet, but there's some push from the federal level to encourage the states and local public health to start getting us in the line. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roy. I'll poll the commissioners to see if anybody has any other questions, and if we don't, then we'll move to adjourn from the meeting. Mr. Trippi.
I do not have any more questions.
Okay. Kelly Marshall.
No, I'm good.
Okay, and Maria Lemieux.
No further questions.
And Mike Ruffolo. Any questions?
I think you always have something to say. Two quick things. Yeah, one is when do we think fiber to the home? When will we have our first subscriber to fiber to the home, or when do we think that'll become a regular thing to have subscribers?
Great question. Well, I guess the regular thing, my hope is, with this new equipment installed, we can start ramping up, the awareness efforts to do that. I think some of that is contingent on Jackie and Joelle's ability to take the added demand for connections. So I know that's not a direct answer. I think ASAP is probably the most accurate. But we could start today with the OLT equipment. If I'm off base, please, Joelle or anyone else, correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe with that equipment and our website active, one of our criteria for Friday was making sure we could support increased interest in connections. And so I believe the answer is now, but we just have to get more awareness as we prepare for that.
I can add a little bit to that if you'd like. I touched base with Joelle earlier. We've got a couple of nodes that were built out as part of the test project, and equipment he's recently installed at the head end will allow us to sell more services in those areas that are already built out. These were the nodes that were completed last year. We've got to talk about a timeline for that. It looks like maybe the first node from this bigger project may come online maybe in the May timeline, where we'll be able to start selling into these new areas that have been under construction as part of phase one. You know, we do have fiber to the home already at the Lakeway Commons. So we have had fiber to the home customers in that pilot project for several years now, since about end of mid 2017. But that was a very limited project. So it hasn't been super widespread. Joelle, did I miss anything? Do you want to add anything to that?
No, that's good. You covered it.
Okay, and Jackie and Joelle, the first area for the first phase is the north side of town, correct? As we work around, and your website, the new website's going to show where those sites are,
Yeah.
where the availability, so people will be able to go there and see what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, so we actually launched SELCOupgrade.com. That's a domain name we've used in the past when we've had customer impacting projects. Think of the email project several years ago. And right now it has information about the fiber project, frequently asked questions, everything from how much does this cost to how long is it going to take to roll out. Hey, I see people working in my neighborhood. What does that mean? As well as it's got a map out there showing broadly phase 1, 2, and 3, along with the big picture timeframes on each of those, bringing them to market. It's not as pinpoint accurate where you can zoom in and see your address and find out a date that it's going to be available. It's more broad brush strokes, but definitely gives the picture of what people can expect as it starts to get underway here. We will also be adding a component on the AMI project, which is coming up, and John Maliver can speak to that maybe on timeline a little bit more, but that's a little further into 2021. So that website will be used basically to kind of keep customers up to date as they're seeing this work being conducted on both of those projects throughout town over the next, I think, 3 to 5 years, we've said, right? So it's going to be a nice touch point that'll help people understand the big picture project.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Foley, you said you had a second question.
And then just to follow on to that, we didn't get this, and maybe because it was always on Mike's plate, but we didn't get the running list of customers or loss of customers on the cable side or telephone side that we traditionally get. A, I was wondering where that was, and then B, if we could add fiber to the home now on that list.
I can answer that. That was submitted to me. I took it out for brevity in the GM highlights, so I could send that to you easily, and we could add fiber to that as well. But I apologize if you wanted that. I personally had omitted that for this round, so I'll take responsibility for that.
I will add that fiber customers are already on there, in that when you're looking at the silver, gold, and platinum customers, those are the legacy internet packages. When you're looking at silver plus, gold plus, and platinum plus, those are symmetrical fiber packages that are currently out there. So you'll already see those subscriber counts. They're not significant at this point, but those numbers are going to continue to grow as we roll these out to new areas.
And I propose, Jackie, that perhaps we can
I'll look
break
out for that.
Jackie, I was going to propose that perhaps we can break it in such a way that we can show the cable and the fiber customers, so that we can see people similar to like how we did it with the TiVo customers.
Yeah, we had shifted. Excellent point, Joel. We had shifted a few, I don't know, maybe a year ago, to providing more of a graphic view of the cable TV subscribers, so you could see how many of them were TiVo compared to the legacy. To Joel's point, we can probably, instead of giving you just running, black and white numbers, we could probably do something a little bit more infographic style, so you guys can get a quicker bead on what's going on as far as how many customers are on the legacy plant versus the fiber plant. We can look at that, Chris. You and I can talk about how we want to present that in the future. But the numbers are there. If Chris sends them to you, you guys should have the update on that.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Mike, Mr. Foley, you have anything else?
I guess my take. Yeah,
Pardon?
I just my take is, as commissioners, we're obviously making a huge investment in this. So us keeping track of the traction and customer interest on this, I think, is important for us.
I agree. And I think Mr. Roy does and the entire staff does. So we'll get them more additional information to follow. Thank you. Anything else? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, roll call vote. Mr. Trippy,
Yes.
Kelly Marshall,
Yes.
Maria Lemieux,
Yes.
Mike Ruffolo,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
okay, and Bob Holland, yes. So with that, at 8:20 or 2020, I thought you already passed us, but anyways, it's haunting us. We will adjourn. Thank you so much, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you all.